Hello to all my booty seekers and cheek chasers. This is the Carpe Natem Podcast. I'm your host, Nate Della Hoya-Reynoso, and I am so grateful you are listening to this episode. If you're new here, you should know that I believe that my purpose is to uplift, inspire, and educate others to communicate masterfully so that they can better understand themselves and others. I've spent years in the personal development and transformational technology space, and I want to share with you the wisdom that has been passed down to me from giants in the industry. So if you are on a journey of self-mastery, just like me, looking to make dreams a reality and willing to be a leader for your family and community, then join me in seizing the butt cheeks of life and giving them a big ol' squeeze. Let's jump into the show. Before this episode starts, I would like to put a sensitive content label on this. I had a very interesting conversation with my friend Caleb, and there were some topics that may be somewhat upsetting for people. You may have an idea or an opinion on something that I said. I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. I want to keep a open and professional dialogue with my audience members. So if there was something said that you have a opinion on, please feel free to email me at carpenatem114@gmail.com. Let me hear your thoughts. I'd love to understand your perspective better. So with that being said, please enjoy this episode. Let me know if you have any thoughts or opinions on anything that I said, anything that Caleb said. I'd love to hear your perspective and continue the conversation. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Carpe Natem Podcast. I am so excited to have my next guest here, Caleb Ogden. He is somebody I met through comedy. He sees himself as a multi-class investor comedian, and I'm very excited to have him on this podcast. Caleb, welcome.
Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to talk.
So something I wanted to bring up with you on this podcast, because I think it'd be awesome for listeners to kind of hear. Because I've seen your resume, I know that you had kind of left school before graduating.
Oh, yes.
But you also had a ton of experience doing a lot of like entrepreneurial things. You were learning on your own. You were growing on your own, which led to a lot of like success, even though you didn't finish traditional schooling, right? You went traditional school, but didn't end up finish, and still had, like, from what I can see on your resume, a very successful career. How do you feel that has changed you from not finishing, from kind of like deciding to go on a different path? How do you feel like that's affected your decision?
I didn't really choose, I'm going to not go to college or whatever. It just kind of worked out that way. I went to a couple semesters. I was studying finance, and I guess my idea was I suck at managing money and I should learn how. It's funny how things all turned out that way. And so, but yeah, I didn't feel like I was getting anything from it. And I was already making a pretty good income as a web developer at the time. And I realized I can just freelance for, I think I started at $30 an hour and something like that.
And at that point, you basically don't want to even go back to class because I had something where I decided not to finish my higher education or my traditional learning, however you want to call it. I went to college, and I definitely feel like that was some of my most formidable years where I really did kind of grow into my character and learn some things. But I didn't finish because I remember I got hired for this company. I was killing it in sales. I ended up getting promoted incredibly fast.
Right.
And then I was making the same amount of money, if not more, because my bonuses were bigger, because of my sales skills. So I was making the same amount of money as my peers with degrees. Mm-hmm. So ever since then, I never felt like schooling mattered, at least not for what I do. For doctors, you for sure need to go to school. If you're a lawyer, there's definitely a standard that you should know in order to be able to present somebody legally.
Yeah, there's some occupations that have a level of risk, and you really have to go through all of the educational process. But a lot of jobs you can learn just through like project-based learning or just going out and like trying it. And I think for me, it was the same where I was like, why am I going to pay money to this organization to learn what I already know? I was also studying web design instead of just getting paid to go do the real thing.
Right. And then gain the experience on the job. And I feel like now there's a big disruption of like the traditional school system where a lot of people are not really opting to do traditional schooling or go to college. So if you're listening to this, I'm not dissuading you from going or not going. But if you feel iffy about your decision, you should really reevaluate like what you want to do. A lot of people just go to go. That's the same reason a lot of people join the army. They just don't know what else to do for them, for their lives. They don't know what they want to do. How did you figure out like what path you wanted to go down?
I feel like I've stumbled into literally everything, and I've never had like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. You know, like I just like, oh, and here I am, and now I'm doing this thing or whatever. And it really has been that way. Like, when I quit school, I was freelancing, and I think that changed the whole world for me because I realized I could make money without anyone. Like I didn't need any, and that's always given me actually a lot of like freedom and confidence. I feel like actually, even when I worked for an employer, in the back of my mind, I knew that I could generate an income from freelancing.
And that's so fun that you developed a perspective like that, and then that gave you almost. No, I'm not going to say it almost gave you. It did give you a sort of superpower where everywhere you went, it didn't matter if you got paid by them or not because you knew in yourself that you could go out and make money without anybody's permission. And I feel like a lot of people kind of go through the struggle of like they're waiting or to get permission to be wealthy or waiting to get permission to make more or do more from some authority figure.
Yeah, and in this world today, you don't have to do that. Like, we have the gig economy with like Uber and Lyft and DoorDash and all those things, but you're capped. Yeah, right, exactly. Now you can monetize whatever, like you have a lot of content creators is what's coming to mind, but I think in the future it won't just be like, oh, I work at this job. Maybe you split your time between 3 companies. Like maybe you're working for TikTok, Instagram, and Snapchat.
I feel like you couldn't because of like the conflict of interest between them, depending on what the role is.
Right, yeah.
But yeah, you could be working across multiple companies as a contractor.
Yes.
Right. So you don't necessarily. That's the other thing is like you don't necessarily have to be working for the big dog to be paid by the big dog.
Yeah, and I've heard people talk about that. I can't quite remember who said it, but I think that is where we're headed is to more of like a project-based earning. And it's really cool to be a part of that because then you get all the benefits of the government, right? You get like a ton of benefits from working at a big company.
And it almost seems like it's going to eventually turn out somewhat dystopian, but I mean, it can turn dystopian if we don't get a watch on it. But I feel like with private businesses, you have a lot of autonomy to freedom, especially when you start becoming so massive that you make enough money that you surpass certain countries' GDPs.
Yeah, like Apple and Google and, the big tech companies. TikTok would be included in there.
Yeah, all the giants in the industry are currently not only taking up huge real estate spaces in major cities, but they are also starting kind of like their own mini cities in some ways. Because if you go to Palo Alto and you go to the Facebook headquarters.
Oh, that's a tiny city.
It's a tiny city, right? Yes. And then they have hotels and housing built on the platform because it was cheaper to build an entire hotel than to continue renting and buying or paying for employees and contract workers to use a hotel or some other service. So they built their own, right?
And the scale of their services, it's so they have everything. They'll change your oil, they'll give you a massage, they'll walk your dog. They have everything.
And they also give you bonuses for, like at Valentine's Day, they'll give you like a bouquet to bring home to your spouse. They have massages. They have food credits. Like it does end up becoming like its own semi-pseudo government.
It really is, because these big companies are sanctioning, kind of in their own way. They're restricting Russia. So Netflix, you can't, use Netflix in Russia. I don't actually know what all of them are. I think a lot of brands have stopped selling, and a lot of tech companies have halted their services.
Yeah, IKEA shut down.
Right.
In Russia, and there was these lines like out the door and around the block because they were like, we're no longer importing any of our stuff. Whatever we have in inventory is it. Then we're shutting our doors.
So I think that's a really interesting thing, and I think it's the first time in history that we've ever seen en masse these corporations sanction a government, and it has to be adding this extra pressure. It's just an interesting point, but
with impact too, because of course there have been sanctions against them in the beginning. Like Facebook and Instagram couldn't be on Russia anyway, but now they've gone as far as to allow like death threats to the president of another country, or they're allowing people to speak of it or something like that. It's very interesting, because as much as I love the idea of like freedom of speech and freedom of the, I want the freedom of speech and freedom of expression, but it feels like in these tech companies, there's a lot of like censorship, and it's only really depending on what they want to censor and what they want to put out there. I'm not saying that any one company has an agenda. I cannot say for sure. I don't work there. I'm not Mark Zuckerberg, so I can't say anything. Like, as an example, I think the stuff that happened with Joe Rogan was just a waste of time. It was just people puffing air over... Which
thing? Nobody talked about him for like a million years, and now that's all people talk about.
I don't know, man. People gave him shit for having people on his podcast who just had a difference in opinion with whatever was being pushed as a local narrative. Some things related to the vaccine, some things related about, so whether it's real or not, whether it has an impact or not, like, it's not like anyone is forced or mandated by the government to listen to Joe Rogan. You have to choose to, right? Whatever he does with his audience is what he does with his audience. No one forces you to go and listen to the Joe Rogan podcast unless, you're in a relationship.
That's why he's such an interesting figure in our culture.
But why do you think he got so much backlash and so much hate for like for example, CNN doctored the video of him when he posted that he had COVID and made him look like he was way sicker than
they desaturated the video or something.
Yeah. And they showed side-by-side comparisons, and they were like, why didn't you just show the original video?
Yeah, it seems like they want to discredit him because he had such an easy time of it, which he's talked about on his podcast.
And as somebody who's had COVID, like, I understand how rough it was. Like, I felt like I almost died. Like, I got hospitalized twice.
Oh, wow.
But some people got it, like my overweight, arthritic, diabetic mother-in-law, and she shrugged it off.
How long were you in the hospital?
A day. So I went twice because I was throwing up. I was, I felt like I had all the symptoms of pneumonia, stomach flu, and strep throat all within an 18-day period. It was pretty awful.
Wow.
So like, I know that it was no joke, and I feel bad because I met people whose family members were affected by it, got it, and passed away. So I'm not taking away from it.
Yeah, it's no joke.
But he did have a point where, like, if you were healthier and you took vitamins and you had a better chance.
But also, he's been saying that since day one. Like, he was just talking about what he always talks about.
And people, for whatever reason, because it didn't fit the narrative, like, go get your shot, pay attention to what the CDC is saying, like, live in fear, be scared. They wanted to, like, discredit him, but I just didn't understand why no one, like, either spoke about it neutrally truthful. Even, like, if I feel like I would have respected our government more if they would have said, like, we've heard some statements made by some people. We want to say that because there's so much knowledge out there and because there's so much variability of the things that are happening, yes, some healthy lifestyle changes can also affect your chances, but we also have to use that in combination with the masks and the social distancing, and then we'll get through this once we reach like a certain level of immunity. I feel like that would be more respectful than like what they were basically saying, was like, do what we say, or go to jail. Yeah. And it wasn't that extreme here, but it was in other countries. But also, and that blew my mind.
And the things that we're saying are unverified by definition. My favorite thing about it is, like, they didn't even try to mask the propaganda.
They said at first it was going to be the cure-all. This is the ticket to go back to normal reality, right? I waited off on it
Yeah.
because I wanted to see what would happen, and then I ended up getting COVID. So I was like, I don't really need to get the vaccine. I actually got the antibodies from having the disease, but people were telling me that's unverified information. That's
That's
hearsay.
science.
That's horse shit. And then later on, they were like, you know what? It actually may be better than the vaccine itself. So like,
Yeah, you get antibodies when you have a disease.
that was the argument that I was having with people. It's just like, okay, does it prevent me from getting it? No. Does it prevent me from spreading it? No. Will I still have a chance of dying if I get it? Yes. And it's just like, well, then why is it mandatory?
I think like the way people see it is, hey, this is a social good. It's a burden that we all should bear together. Yeah, there's something really terrible when people are profiting from a tragedy, and any degree of that,
It really does feel like most people nowadays are just looking for clout.
Oh yeah, that's very true. People are looking for clout because for the first time in history, you can make money from clout.
There's a
So
way
that's
of
like
having
pretty
conversion.
important.
I think you can make money from clout since the dawn of time. Because
Right,
but this is the first time people have been actually creating like
You can
substantial amounts of wealth. Like
Yes.
NFTs are being born and being sold for millions.
there's always been aristocrats and socialites and whatever, like who all of their capital is social capital, and then they turn that into resources and other capital.
I believe it was Monet and some other artists who weren't allowed to go to some like cafe or some popular place, and so they decided to go somewhere else, and because they were the cool artists at the time, they made that other place cool. So clout has always been a factor since like the dawn of time. If you
Yeah.
have the clout, you can make something profitable. It's just now so much more distributed around the world. Because when I was in a band and I had music online, I mean, I still have music, but we have had fans and listeners from other countries. Like you couldn't do that 50, 60
Right.
years ago unless
20
you were,
years ago.
unless you were the Beatles.
Exactly. You had to be the Beatles to do it. And the point is now anyone basically kind of can do it. I mean, it's just, I don't know, like a lot more people can do it is the point.
There's less gatekeeping.
Yeah, and that's a big thing that happened with social media is it allowed people to kind of like aggregate these, the same thing a news or entertainment business would do. You're gathering views,
And
selling ads, selling products.
there's cases that you can find pretty frequently where people are just kind of like expressing the difference in opinion, where there was a lot of people who, because they voted a certain way or because they decided to lean a certain way or kind of be a part of a certain group, they were being blacklisted and silenced by social media platforms. Like I genuinely believe in true freedom is high level communication. And if you're going to allow, of course, you can't allow hate speech and hate rallies and stuff like that on your
Yeah.
platforms. Obviously, we're not advocating for hate.
Right.
But for people to be able to sit there and speak what they believe, I feel like everyone is entitled to that and is deserving of that.
It's like a fundament of a free society. You cannot have a free world if people can't speak their mind, and just let them be judged accordingly. Whatever they say, judge it. Don't restrict it. Silence is violence.
Silence is violence.
Oh my God, that's so great. Everything is just so perfect. Like it's doublespeak through and through. Are you familiar with that word, doublespeak?
No, what's doublespeak?
I can't remember. I think it's 1984, maybe George Orwell. The term basically means that whatever they say is the exact opposite. It means the exact opposite of what it is. And so if you have like the diversity and inclusion, well, what does diversity and inclusion do? Well, it
Separates,
narrows
isolates.
exactly. Yes.
And then that's another thing that I have where like, and this is like another controversial topic where if we have these requirements for diversity and inclusion, it just feels like you are then basing it off of, you're trying to basically check off like a checkbox.
So,
honestly, if you look at like statistically who dominates these industries, it's a certain culture, it's a certain race, it's a certain gender. And they're balancing out. And I love the fact that they do give opportunities to have Black creators, Latin creators.
And
I
that's
love the opportunity.
That's part of it. And it almost justifies the cost.
Absolutely. So I feel like there's a lot of benefit to it. There's like good intentions there. But I feel like when you put such emphasis on it, you start isolating, and it almost becomes like it then backtracks and becomes racist.
Exactly.
Because then you start excluding certain people, and then you're like, what are you excluding them on? Their skin color?
Yeah. Well, even then, like, that's exactly what you're trying to prevent is violence against, less, what would you call them?
Just other people. It's
minority groups. They have a phrase for it.
So you have these people. It always becomes like this categorizing of people. You become this idea of like, okay, I'm part of this group. And then if that group decides that we are against this group, like, okay, why? Is it everybody in that group? And then you throw blankets over these people and over these statements. And then it becomes like, I feel like miscommunication, because you've already been taught that these people are the enemy. These people who have these values and who look like this, these are your friends. But then you get burned by those people. And you're like, the people that I was told to trust, they hurt me. The people that I was told not to trust showed me good things. And then you have this like paradigm conflict where like what you've been taught and what you believe in is now being challenged by your experiences. Let me pivot this conversation though, because you've had a very unique experience in life that I wanted to talk about on this podcast. And that is, you used to be Mormon, used to be married, and then you gave that whole life up. Making that decision to leave, was it hard to leave kind of everything that you had known at the time in order to kind of pursue like your own adventures, your own freedom? Like, did you feel like you didn't live as much or as well as you could have up until that point?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a lot of what I was feeling. The two events weren't really connected in time. They were about 10 years apart. When I was 19, 20 years old, I went and served on a Mormon mission. I don't know how much you know about those, but basically for 2 years, the guys go out and they tell people about the Mormon church, they proselyte and
you were the
evangelize.
Door-to-door guy?
Yep. So it was actually really a great experience and very helpful.
For
and
sales probably, huh?
Just for everything. I mean, you learn to get out of your shell, and you can take a lot of abuse, and you get a thick skin. And yeah, so there's some sales. But also there's just like this great connection with the best thing about these churches and is community is actually the best part. And right. That's what people love, is the community.
Yeah.
And so that is a lot of what you're offering to people, is this really well organized and, I don't know, this structured community. And so
you decided to walk away from all of that. You decided to walk away from the church and everything, but you were so deep into it that you joined a mission. So you were obviously like somewhat invested.
Well, yeah, no, it was a great experience. And when I ended it, it was kind of like, I was living on my own, and kind of, this was around the same time I found freelancing. And I guess what I was thinking at the time was, why am I spending my time doing anything that I don't want to be doing? And I really didn't, one of the problems with the Mormon church for me, but I think it would be the same problem with any religion, is I know everything. I've known everything for 15 years.
Right.
Because it doesn't change.
Right.
So we're just going to read the same book again and again and again for like the next 60 years. I can't do that.
Without any editing or adaptation to current society and life. And no updates.
And some of it does update with like life, but it's very slow. But the main thing is the core doctrine doesn't really change. And whatever your religion is, you have these set of principles and beliefs that never changes. But that's not really how the world works, and it's definitely not how I work. And so that was my big question at the time, was, why am I spending time doing things I don't want to do? So I quit going to the meetings, but I was also reading a lot.
What books were you reading at the time?
A Short History of Nearly Everything by Bill Bryson.
Okay, and that really opened up your eyes
Yep.
to like different perspectives of like what could be.
Yeah, I think my brother recommended it to me actually, and I must have read it. I never read it. I had it on audio maybe 25 times.
Wow.
Yeah, like on
What about
repeat
it-
for maybe a year, something like that.
What about it made it so?
Oh, it was just filled with like this whole world I knew nothing about, because a lot of like education is like they teach you chemistry and they're like, oh, here's how like the oxygen bonds to the hydrogen, whatever, you know, like they don't teach you what's interesting about the history of the universe and whatever, just like whatever's interesting about that subject. They focus on the facts, not the stories.
Interesting. So they're trying to teach what they have to teach in like a modern curriculum, but
Yeah.
then they're only teaching it in a way that supports their story.
It's very instructional. It's very procedural. It's not very interesting. Right. Yeah.
Right.
Like what's interesting is how did we even have these questions? Why did we start looking in that direction? What did we find when we looked there?
So I feel like you stand out from most people because you have like not only this inquisitive mind, but you have this way of looking at things from like a different perspective that doesn't really come easy to other people.
Yeah. And I will say that is directly related to my departure of the Mormon Church, because when I was in that religion, I was super into it. And I don't even know how to say it. Like there was no other world. I didn't have a question in my mind. It was like, this is the thing. Here's what we're doing. I'm an immortal, first of all. That was the biggest thing.
Interesting.
And anyway, there was just like tons of things about it that I was like completely never questioned. And whatever caused the scales to fall from my eyes created a lot of questions.
Dude, I got in trouble constantly because I went to Catholic school and I would get in trouble for taking the Eucharist out of my mouth and looking at it because I wanted to see what it looked like because they never got to see it. They always put it like right in my mouth, right?
So what is your religious background?
I was raised Catholic. I went to Catholic school for 9 years. Even my preschool was like is Catholic prerequisite where they taught us how to pray and meditate and do. Or it wasn't even meditating at the time; it was praying. Right.
It's very religious.
Very religious. And it wasn't like really the religious part about it. It was just the fact that it was like a private school. So my mom thought I would be getting a better education. And maybe I did, maybe I didn't. I felt like I thrived more in public school. And I feel like there was a lot of disadvantages to being in a private school because I was in the same class of 35 students every year since kindergarten. So if you're not one of the cool kids, if you're different, if you're weird, right, you're the weird kid in the class. And it's not like in public school where you had multiple classes and multiple teachers. You had the chance to either find other weirdos or not be the only weirdo in the class, right? And
That would be rough if like the classes never changed.
Every year it's the same
and you
students.
just got like stuck with whatever.
Every year it's the same students. We just went to the next classroom. We went to the neighbor's classroom.
And so how did that influence you? Like, are you still Catholic today? Or?
So it has definitely formulated some sort of weird relationship with spirituality because I feel like there is a spirit realm. I feel like there is a spirit world. I feel like that thoughts and ideas exist in this realm. And I feel like there is a mother source in the center of the universe that we all circle around because it's just kind of like a universal principle. Large masses are being surrounded by other little masses, like the same way we revolve around the sun revolves around another star or another super galaxy, and then we're all kind of circulating like a black hole. I feel like everything is connected in some sort of spiritual way, right?
Yeah.
That's where my background comes from. However, while I was in Catholic school, I was force-fed a lot of doctrine. And when I questioned it, I got in trouble. And that was something where I was very confrontational and I was very aggressive towards authority. So when I asked these questions and they didn't get answered, it pushed me to study. So I went and read Bible verses. I went and looked up stuff so that way I can come back and argue with the priests. And I'm like, tell me why this is here. Oh, you can't? Well, this is what I think it is. And they'll be like, well, that's wrong. And they're like, well, tell me why it's wrong. And then they couldn't. So like I would basically just debate priests.
Or they
Talk
have
to
like
them.
these canned answers, and they're like, well,
Pretty
that's
much.
just how you'll
didn't
find
want-
out in the next life.
They didn't want to debate
like,
with a 7th grader, and maybe I wasn't the most elegant with it. I was definitely an arrogant little asshole.
yeah.
So that was part of it. I was not implementing effective communication, but I was so upset with this forced-fed doctrine that I was like, tell me where in the book it says that. What does that mean? Can't that mean something else? How about this? What about this example? And it got me really into like other religions too.
I think I had a similar path to that as well, where a lot of my questions I couldn't get answers to, or they weren't satisfactory. A lot of it felt like it was, you'll find out in the next world.
But do you feel like we are somewhat connected to a spirit world? Do you feel like manifestation can really happen if like it's not just thinking yourself into wealth, but being able to kind of foresee it in your mind and then taking actionable steps to get to it? Where if you know where you're going, it's easier to get to it than if you just kind of like wish you were going somewhere.
Well, the thing that I'll say about the spirit world or like an afterlife in general is it is unbelievable that we're even here.
Yeah.
Because like nothing is like us. We're the craziest shit around. Animals are pretty close, but outside of that, like if you look at the universe,
everything's dead.
This is it. Well, it's not even dead. It's just like this is the peak of complexity that the universe has created is life.
You think we're the peak?
Well, no. I mean, I bet there's aliens and there's some probably more advanced or whatever.
Than us. Do you think that other civilizations have come before us on this planet and they've just disappeared?
Could very well be. 4.5 billion or 8 billion or whatever.
And then just got wiped out and then restarted all over again?
Yep.
And we just keep going through the cycle of it?
Yeah, but if you look at the universe, I think Carl Sagan has a quote about like how we're like the most complex thing there is. I can't remember. Maybe it's Neil deGrasse Tyson. It's been said many times, I'm sure. But, we are like kind of alone in the universe in that regard.
Are we the most complex because we're able to question our existence?
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. There was only one animal on record that ever asked like a question about itself, and it wanted to know what color it was.
How did they even make that determination?
Because they were taught language. It was a parrot, and then the parrot asked it was the only time on recorded history that an animal asked like a self-aware question.
And I think that level of cognition is probably what separates humans from animals. One of the things that does. It's interesting that an animal could even have it. But Nietzsche, I think, said that the thing that woke up the human animal was self-consciousness.
And self-awareness. Well, from Yuval Noah Harari's *Sapiens*, it was our ability to communicate, where a monkey can tell you that a tiger is nearby or that danger is nearby, but only humans are able to tell you, hey, there's a tiger over there on the left side of the bank near the tree. He's hiding up in the bushes.
Way more throughput.
Which allows us to not only communicate with others, but then hold the tribe. And there's a specific number of people that we can have an effective communication with. Anything past that it's impossible. And I think it's about like 100 to 150 people that we can have like a direct communication with, that we can like influence. There's people obviously below that number and higher than that number, but there's about 150 people that we interact with. And this could be people that we see on the regular, coworkers, family, but it's 150 soft touches. And tribes end up breaking off into bigger pieces or into separate coalitions because that number gets too much. So like one monkey or one human can hold 150 people, and if it gets too big, then it divides into like a separate group, and then people end up going with the other monkey, right? And then somehow we were able to get to a point where we're almost at 8 billion people in the world, and we're all supposed to get along, when the most people that we can get along with is 150.
Well, that's what's also interesting is we're operating so much against our nature. Just everything is so synthetic in our world.
Yeah.
We're sitting on a couch. That's not real. Like we're holding microphones. You can look this up on Spotify.
Which is not real, again. It exists. I feel like most of this technology exists in the spirit world, because where does it exist? Yeah, you can see it on your screen, but where it's...
Well, I guess, yeah. So do you think there's like other life, or What do you think?
100%, dude. I'm totally down for the idea that, because it's the amount of stars that are in the universe, in just the observable universe. The likelihood of them not being at least one or two planets with something similar to what we are, if not as cognitive, something primitive, or just life in general, there has to be. There's plenty.
I think we'll find evidence.
You think so?
Yeah, of higher
In our lifetime?
intelligence, higher societies. Okay, so we have James Webb Space Telescope. Have you heard about that?
Yeah.
So that launched, I mean, it's operational. And so they're going to start doing science with it. Yeah.
I heard we sent like a radio frequency into space and it was like the Beatles or something.
Well, we have been, but I mean, a lot of that stuff decays over time. And by the time it reaches any planet, it wouldn't really have much information left.
It's just going to sound like Satan backwards.
Yeah, right.
We are the Beatles.
Yeah, maybe it'll give them the right idea. No.
And they're like,
idea.
we should never fuck with Earth, dude. They sent us something terrifying.
Yeah. But so that telescope is out there and it has a better lens than we've ever made. Mm-hmm. And that might be the first time we actually have a real answer to if there's life. Because there's a couple things that could give it away. I think that scientists have come up with theoretical ways to search for more advanced light.
Well, you're basically looking for planets who live
life.
in the Goldilocks zone, which is just far enough from the star to get some warmth, but not too close enough to burn up and not far away enough to freeze to death. Like, it has to be right in the same spot, and then it has to be hit with enough asteroids that water lands on the planet, and then it becomes terraformed. It's like, but with the amount of stars in space, there is no way that we are an anomaly.
Yeah, I don't think we are an anomaly, for sure. But maybe we'll find out real soon. To me, what would be the terrifying thing would be to find out that we are an anomaly. Like, what if we searched for 1,000 years and found nothing? That would be something else.
That'd be terrifying.
Yeah.
Because then we're the only thing on the planet.
Yeah.
Then it kind of falls back to like the idea that we might be a scourge or we might be like an infestation. Because
I don't think anything that can like organize matter and do the things that humans do could be considered a scourge just in terms of its prolificity or like how prolific it is. I
think humans are like the funniest thing on the planet and in the universe in general, because I always feel like, because the ideas that we come up with, because you can put a man on a different planet and he could terraform another planet. We could just like move our population to this new planet, and then somebody's going to go over there and make an NFT.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just
absurd.
Like, it's completely absurd, the things that we were allowed to get away with. Like,
but it's always been. I don't know if it's ramping up. Actually, I don't know. I don't know why I said that. The absurdity is ramping up big time these days.
And I love it. I think it's a great time for comedy. It's a great time just to be a commentator on life. Because, like, I don't judge. Yeah. My whole thing is, like, I don't want to judge anybody, but I am here to comment. I'm going to ask questions. I want to know. I want to know answers. You know, I don't care if, like, your favorite thing is, to be fisted in the butt. Like, but I have questions. I'm like, do you have a preference on fists? Like, do you
require their nails to be trimmed?
Exactly. There's, like, other questions. Because I would never do it myself. And I don't judge you for doing it. If that's what makes you happy and it's consensual, then hell yeah, right? But if you're going to do it, there's no way that you're going to live without scrutiny, or at least somebody being like, hey, man, what made you do that? Like, for example, there's a good guy that I know. He's branded. So he took a hot brand of the Omega sign on his chest and on his arm.
Wow. And
he did this for his fraternity. He was a D1 athlete. He was in college. Other people did it. And I was sitting there and I'm like, why? Like, what made you go through that? And
he's like, because I'd be a badass.
Because he's a beast. He's an absolute beast. And he didn't even see it as like a big deal. It was just something that he had to do that day. He was bleeding in one of his midterms or one of his finals from the open wound, the searing wound that he had. But it was a discussion of just like, when we all giggled about it, because it was just like, it's so silly that out of all the things you had to do that day, getting yourself branded was one of them.
Yeah, it's just like a to-do item.
And he was just and he kind of laughed about it. Like, now thinking about it, he was just like, it's such a silly idea. But he did it. It's part of his experience. He's had it for years. But I can't even imagine any scenario where I would take hot iron to my skin. And this man did it twice.
Well, he was probably also 17 or 25 or something.
22, 23 in the college era and the young
22
dumb.
and 17 is probably the same for a guy.
For real, man. I feel like I didn't even mature until I was like 24, 25. And even then I was still fucking up, right? I now have, as of this podcast, like 3 years of like California sobriety, right? Where I no longer do like hard drugs. And with therapy, proper medication, and a loving and adoring wife who's been an absolute amazing support system, I cannot say that, you know, all that I have right now was just made by me through force will. I had like a tribe behind me.
Yeah, I think everyone does.
So
everyone
the
does.
maturity, I feel you on that, where like, yeah, just because you're an adult doesn't mean like you understand how the world works. You just are allowed to do more and more the older you get. Like at 25, you can rent a car. But at 21, you have to buy a drink. But at 18, you can die in another country. But God forbid you buy a beer before, 21.
Yeah, they got to set some of the limits higher and lower on those.
I know some of those.
Need a little adjustment.
If you can die for this country, you should be able to consume alcohol.
No doubt.
But yeah, man, it's the world we live in. Not only feels like absurd, but it's just like it's in a silly way. I'm just glad that there's enough around us that I feel incredibly blessed and grateful that there's so much just content to pull from. Like real life is just as funny as skits on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, it's a great time to be a commentator on that because there is so much to say on everything happening. And we also have so many more cameras on and microphones on, like everything is like being broadcasted or whatever. And so there's just a lot more news and we're learning a lot.
I'm super excited for the future and what the future holds. I'm very grateful that you are one of my friends here in Austin, and I'm incredibly grateful that you were on this episode, man. Is there a way where people can find you on socials?
TikTok, Caleb.Ogden, CALEB.OGDEN. Go follow me.
Yeah, he's making lots of content with his cute dog.
It's pretty cute.
Yeah, everyone go give him a follow. Caleb, it has been an absolute pleasure getting to talk to you for the last hour. I hope to have you again on this podcast. Thank you for such a fun conversation to tease my brain with.
Dude, that was really fun. Let's keep talking another time.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of the Carpe Natem Podcast. If you love this episode, please consider leaving a positive rating and review on Apple Music or iTunes. It takes 30 seconds for you, but for us, it helps spread more positivity to people during these chaotic times. It helps build a community, and it makes me smile from ear to ear. Speaking of community, we have a Facebook group at www.facebook.com/groups/Carpe Natem. Just answer the 3 questions to get access to some extra motivation and inspiration for your timeline. If you would like to support the podcast, screenshot this episode and share this to your story and tag me on Instagram at Carpe Natem 114. That's going to be my handle across all platforms, including TikTok, if you would like to give me a follow. If you haven't already, please rate us and subscribe on Spotify or anywhere you enjoy your podcasts. And lastly, you can find all episodes, linked to resources and opportunities for coaching and mentoring from me at carpenatem114.com. I cannot thank you enough for spending a part of your day with me. You are all rock stars taking the necessary steps to be your best self, willing to do whatever it takes, and ready to grab life by the butt cheeks. Until next time, this is Nate De La Hoya-Reynoso signing off.